The UK's snap general election is underway. The eyes of thousands of strategists, politicians and the public are on the polls. Pollsters are said to have got a bad reputation after the mostly missed Brexit and the scale of the Tories' 2015 majority. Let's go over to the UK via phone and speak to Andre Allison, a journalist in the UK. Good morning, Andre.
Good morning to you.
Yes, how are you doing and how's the UK?
I'm doing very well. My particular part of the UK in Yorkshire is, well, it's raining, so it's a typical English summer here. But apart from that, we're all well.
Let's talk about campaign prior to the election. How have the Labour and Conservative campaigns been?
I think it's been a rather sort of disappointing election campaign in many ways. Theresa May called this on Brexit, as you mentioned in the introduction, but of course it hasn't really focused on Brexit throughout. I mean, sadly, we've had the two terrorist atrocities, one in Manchester just over 2 weeks ago, and then at the weekend again in London. So that has really overshadowed the campaign. So therefore, questions have been raised about Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party's suitability to become Prime Minister, as he's been alleged that he's had terrorist sympathies in the past. So it all started with Brexit, moved away onto security. Labour has tried to push it onto health and various things like that, but it hasn't really been a particularly great campaign.
And Andre, were there any calls in the UK? I know campaign was suspended at the time of these attacks you mentioned, but were there any calls for a suspension of the election proper?
Yeah, I mean, there were some calls, but those calls didn't come from any of the mainstream political parties, and that would have just never have happened. You can't let the terrorists win in this sort of situation. You have to make sure that the democracy continues, and I don't think that there was ever any doubt that the election was going to take place today.
Would you say people are enthusiastic about this election?
Probably not. I mean, we've had a lot of elections in the UK recently. I mean, up in Scotland, they had the independence referendum in 2014, then a general election in 2015, then the EU referendum last year, and now they're back. And they also had Scottish Parliament elections as well last year, and now we're back to a general election this year. I think a lot of people in the UK have got election fatigue, but I do think the majority of people can actually work out why this election has taken place. And Theresa May had a very small majority in the House of Commons. It was going to be much more of a battle to push things through, not just the Commons, but in the House of Lords, because she didn't have a direct mandate to do the type of Brexit that she wished to do. So that's gone into her manifesto, and we expect the Conservatives to be returned with a sizable majority this time round. It'll make it much easier to get Brexit through.
And so what's the general sentiment among Brits? Would you say they feel this election is necessary at all? I mean, based on Brexit?
I think people think it's necessary. I think the majority do think it's necessary. But, you know, most countries, you know, we don't like to be asked questions too many times at the ballot box. But I think people do feel that it's necessary, and although some people would rather cynically say that the Prime Minister simply did it because the opposition was very weak and she could get a very large majority in the House of Commons. That's not for me to say.
And Andre, what other factors do you think is causing the apathy apart from election fatigue?
I think there's a general distrust here amongst politicians. I mean, this started back in 2009 when there was a big expenses scandal that was revealed by the British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph. And it showed that a lot of MPs were fiddling their expenses. Quite a number of them, and indeed a couple of peers in the House of Lords, were imprisoned for expenses fraud. And I don't think, you know, I'm sure it's probably the same in your country as well, but politicians in general are not held in the highest regard. But when they sink even lower, it gets worse. And MPs really haven't recovered from that, and even though that was 8 years ago. So, and a lot of people feel that, all right, we have a general election, but does anything really change? You know, are our schools going to be any better? Is our hospitals going to be any better? And people think, well, nothing's really going to change. So that's why you get a turnout that could be quite low. I mean, you know, we're hoping for a turnout above 70%, but it's possible it could dip below 70%. perhaps not just to do with apathy, but to do with the weather. If it's raining heavily in parts of the UK today, some people will just not bother to leave their homes and go to the polling station.
Interesting, Andre. You speak about turnout. It's been a few hours since polls started. What would you say? Do you know what the turnout is so far? Is it encouraging?
No, we never know this until it's all finished. I mean, there is anecdotal evidence that you can speak to people. I mean, I haven't voted yet. I will go at lunchtime in a couple of hours, but and I will usually ask my local polling station clerk, how's the turnout been, and they'll tell me, and it gives you a little bit of an indication locally, but nothing nationally. Okay. And of course, the turnout varies massively from constituency to constituency, and generally in Labour voting areas, the turnout is low, and in Conservative voting areas, the turnout is much higher. And that can be between 15 and 20 points, so it is considerably higher.
And Andre, we know that pollsters missed the scale during the 2015 election in terms of the Tories' majority. But what are the polls saying this time?
Oh, that's a $64,000 question, isn't it? I think, despite some of the polls showing that the Conservative lead was narrowing and the Labour Party was pretty hot on Theresa May's heels, I don't believe any of that. I still think that the Conservative Party is looking towards a majority of 100 seats, certainly a minimum of 75. But I wouldn't at all be surprised if the majority isn't around 100. But now that I've said it, and I've also put it in print as well when I've written about this, I'm probably going to be hopelessly wrong, but I don't think I am.
All right, thank you very much, Andre. We wish you an incident-free election in the UK, considering all that's happened. All the best. Andre Allison is a journalist coming to us from the UK.